Hello there.
Hello, love.
Hello. Good to see you again. That's a very beautiful Sri yantra you have there.
Thank you.
We both have these sacred backgrounds. I'm going to pull my Kuan Yin a little closer here.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
That's a great one. That's awesome.
It looks like I've got
I know.
the arms. Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see
So
you.
I am recording. Later I can edit or whatever when we look, and your hair looks great.
Thank you. My crown.
Yeah. Oh, so intense times on planet Earth. Yesterday when we checked in, the first thing you said is, so how's your frequency? This is what we expected at 2012, and now here we are 8 years later. It's the end of the world as we've known it. There's definitely a turning of the tides, shifting, major shifting going on. And I thought that we could have a conversation, not so much of an interview where I like throw questions at you, but more of a conscious conversation about different aspects of what we're aware of at this time. And my intention, just to really put it forward for you and for people that may listen later, is that we come from our hearts with the intention to love and serve. Obviously, overall, that the reason to do this is to serve the collective at this time of shifting, this great awakening. And I'm devoted to this work in service to the awakening of the collective heart of humanity. I've held it like that for a long time, that not so much about systems change out there will we see the greatest change. The change that I'm really committed to in my own work with my initiates and clients is about our ability to be the change and to see the changes from the inside out. And I know that you have also been on a path of deep, deep esoteric study, mystical path for years. And that you've even written a book about, I think you call it the 5 most important things.
Yeah, the 5 most important things you don't learn in school.
Oh yeah. So I would just love to start with that, and whatever you would share from your wisdom, from your perception about how those things that you've come to as the 5 most important things that they don't teach you in school could serve people at this time, and anything else that you're starting to really wake up to realize is going on at this time.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having this conversation. Like, more, I think, civil conversations need to be had right now. One of the things that I'm observing is that with the last few generations, probably since the 80s, right, as soon as we got out of Gen X, people's attention span has gotten lower and lower, right? So I've also read that like reading comprehension has gone down, right? So you think about what parts of the mind that are actually activated when you're reading. So now we get information so quickly, we get it through videos, and a lot of what we can do is learn very rapidly, but we're looking to usually fulfill a task. So one of the things that this does is it puts us in a very short attention span, which means we don't get to go that deeper thought, right? So we don't go through the refinement of our thoughts and emotions. It's usually we're hit with something, either we like it, we don't like it. It's red or it's blue, it's black or it's white, it's good or it's bad. And that's kind of like looking at your computer screen and being mad what's on the screen whenever there's something that's on the screen, instead of understanding what is the code underneath it, right? So most of what I try and connect with people on is to understand the root causes and where things are coming from, both in their self-expression as well as when they're connecting to other people. So we've lost a lot of connection to our elders and to that depth that actually goes all the way to the root. And now we're in a situation where our emotional triggers, and that's a word that has come out in the last 5-10 years, is, oh, I'm triggered. What does that actually mean? That means you're psychologically programmed through some set of trauma to be able to be shown one word, one image, or anything in which an emotional state can be activated. So if you think about that, if all it takes is for me to say abortion, and you're immediately pushed into an emotional state, right? Or I can say anti-vax, and you're immediately pushed into another emotional state. You are not really in control. You can have your thoughts and you can have your opinions about it, but if your emotions move so drastically with just one certain thing, you're already pre-programmed. So it's not giving you the ability to digest new information and to actually make critical decisions. You're already pre-programmed. And I feel that that's the unfortunate consequence of this society. And as a marketer, and as being a lifetime marketer, I understand these things, and these are things that I work with in marketing. It's like, hey, how do you associate these two things? You know, lifestyle marketing is a big thing. So that's a thing that, I really try and work with people on a personal level, as well as professional, is understanding the deeper root causes. And once you can operate from there, you have a whole different experience. But it's literally changing your entire thought process, because right now people are just being emotionally triggered. Yeah. And now, once you're emotionally triggered, the powers that be, the mass media, social media, and these media forces can direct your emotional energy towards whatever cause they want, not necessarily for your benefit, but usually for their profit. So that's something that I try and help people become aware of, is to be more centered and to be able to check in on the outcomes and the intentions that they want to create. So my intention in sharing with you is to be able to be a voice that uses this thought process a little bit more, to help share, to help open up minds so they can actually have deeper access to their thought systems as well as their own internal emotional systems, and then they can choose how they want to react. Taking the time to choose.
Thank you so much for this important work that you're embodying and sharing. And right now, as you speak, I know that there's a lot coming up to be revealed. Some talk about this time being kind of almost this mythopoetic biblical time called the apocalypse, which means the unveiling or the revealing, the revelation. And what I'm aware of is that much of what's being revealed is more of these agendas that we would call the kind of like the underbelly of the manipulation, the programming, the system, and the corruption within the system itself, that for so long we've been living as, be a good citizen, pay your taxes, watch your program television shows as usual, and keep it together and take your antidepressants or whatever. If you're feeling too much, then something's wrong with you, so we'll just suppress that, and you can keep on keeping on with the system and the program, right? So the program is obviously, or the system is breaking down, and this is not our normal life. In the last arc of 3+ months now, we have been in forced isolation. Some call it quarantine. We have been out, many of us out of work, not being able to gather. Many of us that work with people in person have been experiencing extreme financial hardship. Many people that have jobs that may be deemed replaceable by machines, and looking at the future of work itself, we're facing this really extreme wobble in the collective consciousness of humanity right now. There's a lot of anxiety and gripping fear. When you talked about a thought process that penetrates deeper than this quick, on off, black white, bipolar kind of ones and zeros, when we're talking about our inherent ability to feel and intuit and reach deeper levels of wisdom, what I'm aware of is when the root chakra is hijacked with survival fear, this becomes even more impossible. That when we're in self-preservation mode, we are not coming from our hearts and that kind of larger pattern view of what is in service to self and other in the bigger picture. When we're in survival mode, it's just basic animal, primal, reptilian brain instincts kick in, and we are divided. We see each other as threats and enemies rather than human family.
Right. So, yeah, and that's something that is an unfortunate circumstances of being in the dark ages, right? I still consider us in the dark ages. And I say that because we're still led by power, greed, control, lust. Like these are the things that actually guide us. We're not, we're on the cusp. You know, it's not to say that we're just completely in it, but we're literally on the cusp. And that's where we're seeing this pushback now to try and move to something different. But the whole system, if you take a look at it, it's, you know, we look at celebrities as royalty. We look at, you know, people who have as royalty, and we look at people who have not as less than, right? But we don't look at the systems that actually created them. We don't really look at the systems, right? So it's really hard to try and be compassionate if you feel that somebody has been in the same situation as you, but they've continually made bad decisions, and that's why they're there where they are. You know, and a lot of people, I see that in this day and age, is there's so many assumptions, like that somebody has lived the same type of life. And so you judge them, or we judge them as if it was us going through it. So when someone says, you know, oh, walk a mile in their shoes, it doesn't matter if you walked a mile in your shoes. You're a different spiritual configuration as your brother, and they're on a different path of learning. They might have skills and talents that are beyond you in certain areas, and you might have skills and talents beyond them in certain areas. But we both have our shortcomings and our strengths and our weaknesses. And to judge someone as if, oh, I could have done it better, well, you might have been better equipped. You know, you could have walked the same path and had the same decisions, but you might have been better equipped. So even if you're going down that same street, you're going to be looking at the world through a whole different perspective because of all the other experiences that person had that actually makes them unique. And I feel that we lose a lot of that because we're just not thinking enough. We don't have time for it. Our entire system is overloaded with messaging, right? We're constantly hit with messaging that triggers and triggers and triggers all these emotional states. So we're very emotionally unstable. We're not just grounded in our emotional state, and then we're getting excited about an event, or we're moving our energy towards that. And it's something that we consciously do. It's something that we're always in reaction to. And especially now that so many different things, you know, pandemic, these, you know, horrible abuses of power and police brutality, like all these different things that are being shown to us, is just moving our whole emotional body like crazy. First, absolute social distancing. Now we have people protesting really close to each other and by thousands. And it's like, that's like, so how do you actually really process all that energetically? You know, it's quite overwhelming. And one of the things in the book that I talk about, and I try and really simplify these concepts down, because one of the things that I notice for those who are on a spiritual path, as well as on a conscious path, trying to wake up and just see the larger world as a whole, is after you start getting certain levels deep, it's really hard to communicate to people who haven't dove into these thought processes, emotional processes, you know, self-reflection. Like a lot of people are just trying to survive, like you said. So, you know, the book focuses on how to make health in the human body, communication and relationships, how to make money, how to manage money in the legal system. And included in the legal system is how to deal with police and how to talk to police and understanding your rights, at least in the country in which I live, the United States. And I talked to an attorney about this. So these are things I talk to professionals about, each of these different things, because literally those 5 things, if you have a good handle on that, you're able to manage day-to-day life completely different than people who are suffering in any one of those areas. If you have a good grip on how to systematically work with any troubles that show up there and you start working a process through it, which I use, which I call peachy, right? It's keeping everything peachy. And that's, you know, planning, evaluating your plan, taking action, cultivating that action, and then harvesting and enjoying, right? So we're taught in this country to always just work, but we're not really taught to enjoy. All right. So we don't, our vacation time is crap compared to the rest of the world. And these other things that actually relax the system, we're always taught to get more and more and more and more and more, where that can actually just burn us out and burn our circuitry out. So those are some of the things that I, cover in the book, is helping people get those processes. So I'm not diving in so deep into all the spiritual and esoteric, because if you're already on that path, you're going to be unlocking doors all the time. You're going to be seeking, you already are driven to it. But if you're in survival, and this is where I try and catch people, is like, oh, if you're in survival, what can we do so you can have this baseline of this comfort within, oh, my money's okay, I'm moving it properly, my health is okay, I'm not suffering physically, mentally, emotionally, consistently, I got a handle on that. And once you have that, now you can make a move to deeper esoteric awakenings. Because when you're trying to make rent and you're worried about, getting your light shut off, your water shut off, it's really kind of hard to dive deep. But when everything else is good, you can go, you can just let go. But so that's what I see as a big challenge these days, is everybody's fighting. So much energy is applied to each of these areas that we can't get to that source that really connects us all, which would solve all those problems for so many more people. Millions and billions of people who are suffering from that would be solved when we can get to that unifying connection. But
Right.
Those are the things that I see that block us from it.
Right. And ultimately, the system itself will need to shift into a system that shares resources, that isn't built on he who dies with the most toys wins, where there's actually more spirit in the system rather than this egoic, kind of narcissistic. I almost think of it like we've been existing in this very technological, very self-centered third chakra energy. And I know for some people who aren't as familiar with the chakras, I would say that the third chakra is about power, like you started this call with. The poison in the system is that it's based on power rather than love. Like Jimi Hendrix said, one day when the power of love is greater than the love of power, we'll know peace, we'll know balance, we'll know harmony on earth. And right now we're at this cusp of where the toxins are really coming to the surface, where the old way, where it's power over and power to have and to take rather than empowering our fellow humanity. This is why we have a slavery system, whether it's debt slaves or real slaves. There's also an incredible darkness that's being revealed at this time around the sex slavery industry that's coming to the surface. I mean, many of us just did not want to look. We did not want to feel the insanity of this horror that's been going on with our children. So whatever we can do to downregulate our own nervous system and breathe with what I would call kind of like the horrors as they're being revealed, that we can stay in a place of compassion to the best of our ability, not just for what we would perceive as the innocent victims, but even the people who are so lost and distorted in their idea of identity and power.
Right now, there are perpetrators, so there will be victims. I understand both. To be able to just try and move everyone to a space of love and light, we're all one, we can't make that step right now. For the majority of consciousness, we're not at a space where we can make that step. And for a lot of people who've experienced, especially let's look at children, you talk about children. Yeah. If you're in a defenseless position where you do not have power, what is it that inspired you to be molested? How are you not a victim when you don't have equal power of choicing? You can't actually go away. So to just try and put it on them to say, hey, what did you do to attract this into your life? Yeah. They don't have, and a lot of people don't have those choices yet. It's when you actually get to a level of maturity, when you can make these choices, then you are putting yourself in a situation that is a bad decision that can make you a victim. If you're a store owner, it's like, oh, well, you have a store. Well, then someone broke in, stole it, and looted. Well, what made you do that? It's like, well, actually, they were inspired to do something, wrong. And that happens. You take a look at some of the most beautiful souls in history. It's like, what happened to them? Evil does exist in the world. Like, that's something to be very, very clear of. You know, as much as we are love and light and we come from love and light, this world is not pure love and light. This world is polarity. This has good and bad. You take a look at our highest, you know, you take a look at Martin Luther King. How did he die? Assassination. JFK, assassination. You know, President, you know, Lincoln, assassination. Religious, Christian, Christ, how did he die? So you take a look, was that because there are good people in the world? Is that because the world is all good? No, there's actual evil. So that's something that we have to understand and be able to identify.
I agree with you.
And that's the part that I feel that people are having a struggle with, because they're so into understanding these smaller fights, right? This black versus white, instead of good versus evil, right? Because I've sat in the middle of both, and I've experienced black people wanting to cause me extreme harm, and I've experienced white people trying to cause me extreme harm growing up. You know, I lived in North Carolina for several months, and I had literally no friends, 0 friends. Me, who's very loving and very open, I have hundreds and thousands of friends around the world of all colors, but growing up in a place where people are indoctrinated into hate, I literally would sit in a cafeteria for 6 months in pretty much solitary confinement. None of the kids, black or white, would talk to me. The black kids wanted to fight me. The white kids wouldn't even look at me. And I would sit alone at a lunchroom during lunch, alone in the corner at a table, solitary confinement, because of what has been pre-programmed. I would be faster than kids when we would race. I would never get picked in sports because no one wanted to have me because I was different than them. So there is this programming that goes on, and there is good and bad. The problem that I'm seeing that is people will associate with a cause that is being directed to them, and their emotions will move towards it, and they will defend their group, this group think mentality of, I'm part of this group can do no wrong. You know, I like the police and what they do, so they can do no wrong. Well, actually, police can commit crimes, and there is excessive force. And if we can't see that, if we say, okay, I see that, but I'm gonna say blue lives matter, all lives matter, black lives matter, like, you go into this communication of division instead of seeing that is an abuse of power. That human being is on the ground and they cannot defend themselves, and you're just causing continual harm to that person. That is sick, that is wrong. Period, the end. Now we can dive in and say, what are the motivations behind that and all that, but we need to be able to see something and identify it as wrong and be able to speak up immediately. When we see someone abusing someone else, a child that's being abused, we should not walk away quietly. We are determining what society looks like by what we enforce or what we let to be okay.
Right. This is fierce compassion, wrathful compassion, not this kind of like bypassing soft, fuzzy compassion that's like, oh, they'll be okay. That's their karma, blah, blah, blah. So when we spoke yesterday, you also said, and people should not be rioting right now, especially people of color, because of this particular incident, because there are other powers that are wanting that are expecting
what's going on in that situation is extremely complex. I mean, I've seen videos of like bricks being put out, and I've seen a whole bunch of things. And I think when it comes to rioting, that is, it sucks. It absolutely sucks. And there's a small part that want to see the world burn, right? There's a small part that are emotionally angered and then are directed towards doing these different things, because there's not a clear way to get change, right? Let's think about it. If 13% of the population is Black and 100% of them agree on a topic, nothing can get done, period, the end. You have 13% of the in total vote, and 100% of you absolutely agree that this is essential for your community. The world doesn't care. The percentages aren't on your side. But the actions are not strategic enough to say, all right, I know what to do. But you know, one thing that I do know, violence gets a response. 100% of the time, violence gets a response. It's terrible, but it works. And that's why I say we're in the dark ages, because you talk about we need to share resources. Intelligent allocation of resources is not something that we look at in this world collectively. And I don't think it can exist without us having an intelligent heart that's based on love, right? So we're always going off of, as long as the leading mentality within our system is power and control, even if I try and set up those resources, you take a look at communism, you take a look at that, all of a sudden you start seeing inefficiencies and certain people manipulating that system for more. And that's just what you see when you try and implement that without having the heart center first. And it's pretty much a paradox, but that's the world that we live in. It's very paradoxical, because until you have some of that equanimity and you have those things satiated, you can feel safe at night, you can have food in your belly, you don't feel, you're in harm's way, and you can kind of progress in life. It's hard to be able to get into that centered space of love. And even those people in power are not portraying those energetics. So now what I idolize, they're not even radiating love, right? So if you have the most successful people in the world, and these are the most idolized people, but we're not saying, wow, look at how compassionate they are.
No, it's materialistic. They're promoting materialism.
Right. So if you take a look, and it also feeds into our different chakra systems, right? So you even take a look at our another primal thing. It's just like mating for men. Like you take a look at, what does it look like to be a successful man? Oh, that's going to attract a quality mate. It's riches. It's not the kindness of your heart. It's not the truth that you stand in. It's not being of the greatest integrity. Now women are flocking to you, and women are exonerating these men and showing that, oh my goodness, these are the men that we want to share our energy with, to share our life with. That is not being shown to us. So even as a boy becomes a man, as he transitions into manhood and he's trying to be something, to bring a life and family together, he's being programmed literally with these ideas of what it looks like to be successful. Have a lot of women, have a lot of stuff, right? So that's the mentality that you're up against, and it's really hard. So the rioting and stuff, it sucks, because it doesn't make sense logically, but guess what? Violence works. It sucks, but it works, because we're in the dark ages. If you take a look at what just happened, the police just defunded $150 million in LA to give towards communities of color. That could have been done a long time ago.
Yeah.
We just printed, Jay Powell and our Fed, he just printed over $2 trillion just to pay everybody right now. But meanwhile, the systemic things that could be done throughout this country have not been invested in. We cut a check because there's a pandemic, people are at home, and now we're cutting a check. We could have redone all the communities that really needed housing, that really needed, setting up community gardens, setting up public transportation throughout LA and these other major cities. All of that could have been funded years and years and years ago. These public works projects could have been there. You take a look at, our prison system, because this is going to go hand in hand with our riots, right? Our prison system, a lot of it is privately funded. What does that mean? It's a for-profit entity. Imprisoning people is actually profitable for businesses. So as a business, would it be good for there to be civil unrest for me if I own that business? Would it be good if I have high capacity, then I would have a high amount of supply and I can use those prisons to generate and manufacture goods? Yeah.
So are prisons turning into like sweatshops then?
They
like,
have been
like
for
slave
years.
labor then.
That's the new slave labor. And take a look at the incarceration rates of African Americans. So you start taking a look at the slavery from back in the day to slavery now through the prison system, and it's absurd. It's absurd. But we're not using, so you have to take a look at this design. That's why I say evil still exists in this world, because these things are designed. They don't just happen by happenstance, right? So you set up these chaotic situations. You set up music that promotes violence. You set up this society that promotes violence and glorifies
Hollywood films, all the video games.
All those things. So psychologically, you're shown as violence as the solution, and now you're sending people to jail in droves, and now you have this private institution. Well, guess what? I believe that prisons and people who are not, violent and a danger to other people, 100% of them should be in work in the community. That's what the state should own. All of that should be owned by the people, by the community. The community should own the prisons. The prisoners should be working on repairing the society that they caused harm to. That doesn't exist. Right now, they can cause harm to society, but then they become profit for a company. So you can literally rob from the poor to give the rich.
Oh my God. There's part of me that just feels like crying. And then I'm aware that collapsing in despair right now is just continuing to fuel that like machine, that kind of toxic yang energy that's consumptive. I think about the yin and the yang energetics, the divine masculine and feminine, when they're in their highest qualities, work together in synarchy. And when we're in shadow qualities of feminine and masculine, it's like this toxic yang energy that consumes and burns, and it's like that fire element that just destroys. And then the toxic yin is collapse, indulgence, and that kind of victimization that's like, there's nothing I can do. So you get stagnant and don't speak up and don't do anything.
Well, I think that's the challenge, is learning how to take intelligent action, right? So, and this is one of the big things that I look at is, the Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, and how that became, into our nomenclature, right? These are our words and terms that exist. And there's some big challenges, right? Because I think the branding sucks on both of them all around, right? So you say Black Lives Matter, then it's almost like that should be just a given. It should be a given. So you try and say something that is a given, but the way that the phrasing is it's presupposing that it's stated that it doesn't matter, right? So that's like, oh, okay. Yeah, like if you say something matters, then you're trying to presuppose that someone said it doesn't matter. So it's already started an argument. Now the actions of certain people might show that it doesn't matter, but then you get this counterforce that says all lives matter. And I've seen people in the spiritual community trying to use like, oh no, all lives do matter. But do they? Like, that's one of the things we look at. Do they? Does that organization and the people who say that really truly believe that? And that's the thing that I look at is, okay, Black Lives Matter doesn't really tell me what actions to take, right? That's the problem. If the whole thing was end police brutality, fund communities so we can restructure our environment so people are less likely to create crime, like very specifically out there all the time. Like people are posting as far as black squares, but they're not posting action items that create change and demands for those changes and those structural things. So where's the intelligence behind the action, right? Just take this action. No, what is the structural change? Communicate that to everyone. Demand that our leaders put together this action plan to create that change. If that's not in place, you just have an emotional group that's all wild up, that mass media and everybody else can just point and say, release anger in this direction instead of release it strategically to create structural changes, this, that, the other, right? Having those different things.
I really wonder whose idea it was to post pure black squares all day. It's taking away the power
from the voice.
People. Yeah, taking away the people's power to communicate and share and illuminate.
On a lot of primary election day too. It was like, there's a lot of primaries taking place. So that's one thing. But on the other aspect that I wanted to just, speak on was the all lives matter thing, because essentially, yes, life matters. All lives matter when you truly believe that, right? When you truly believe that, and you will truly stand up for it. But when you look at it and you don't apply that, and you don't take that to the hurricane hits Haiti, where's the all lives matter people? Puerto Rico, where are the all lives matter people? If you're not taking that, wherever there's injustice, there's people starving in Africa, malaria, these, major disaster zones. If the all lives movement is not there, then it's bullshit. It is bullshit. You are not looking at life. What you're doing very specifically is the analogy was great. One of my brother artists, Sakandi Solomon, he posted, screaming all lives matter at a Black Lives Matter convention or rally or anything else is like running into a conference for breast cancer and moving everybody out of the way, going to the microphone and saying, no, 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 all cancers matter. It's not about breast cancer. It's about every cancer out there. We need to focus on every cancer. And it's like, well, there's a disproportionate amount of women that suffer from breast cancer. So maybe that needs its own specific type of research, and we need to look into that so we can actually comfort those who are disproportionately affected by this cause. Okay, polar bears are going extinct. No, 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 all bears matter. It's like, well, yeah, I'm not like, so when you do that, have that mentality really. Go up and fight for the lives of all those who are in near death or endangerment. If you can do that, and you're going to be out there in the hurricane relief zones, and you're going to be out there protesting, injustice in Mexico through drug cartels and everywhere else that life is endangered, then I would say, 100% you are a true badge, hashtag it everywhere. And yes, all around the world, all lives matter is showing up at every disaster zone and making changes. They're not. So that's what's happening there. It's only used to drown out the voices of those in need. And so it's being weaponized. These beautiful concepts that we have are being weaponized and used against us. And it's psychological on the deepest level. And for those who don't understand hypnotherapy and they don't understand groupthink, there's so many levels you have to get to understand the psyops that are actually taking place. But that's what needs to happen.
Say a little bit more about that, because I've had just in the last 3 months an experience that some would say is like being majorly red pilled. Like there was my own personal awakening process, a lot of change shock, and then I was bombarded with all these videos about the deep state agenda, and it felt like such a lot of horror. So when you talk about psyops right now, and I know that shamanically speaking, I've been told and it's been said that we're not looking at red and blue. We're not looking at Democrat, Republican right now. They're two wings of the same bird. There's something much, much deeper at play here.
Yeah.
And just wanted your take.
So when you look at, once again, like I said, evil exists on this planet. Even if Christians really, know it, they've seen, they just identify it as Satan and the devil, and know as far as Christ being tempted on the mountain where, he's literally saying to the devil, get behind me, Satan, right? So in that world, there's like, hey, this is something that literally exists in the energetic fields that we actually play in, is this evil, right? So when you take a look at the sources, and one way that it shows up in our society is sadists. There are sadists that actually exist. There are people who are wired where the joy for them comes from the suffering of others, right? So if you take a look at being wired that way, well, the greatest amount of suffering is literally the greatest good. It's a very twisted thing, but that's something for those type of people is literally a joy for them. So if you take a look at the psychological operations, it's more for control. And like the biggest red pill that if you take a look, and it's a combination of a lot of things. So right now, I've been taking red pills for the last, since 98 is when I was like, come on, you're kidding me. That can't be, the government would never do something like that. It wouldn't do. And then I started looking at history and, discovered things like, Project Northwoods, where the government was actually planning a false flag operation and, killing civilians so they could go to war with Cuba. And it was like, wow, that's actually a CIA document. And it was actually released. And here it is, like actually saying that these things are documented throughout history for power and manipulation of the public. So that's what you have to understand is who owns the media. There's 5, 6 major media corporations who sits under the board of directors. So a lot of people think that, oh, these things happen in happenstance, but I've posted videos where you see the messaging from one place gets broadcast everywhere and other voices get drowned out. And that's what I was saying. If you take a look at the, All Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, that's only because we're putting our attention there. The ultimate goal is to be able to broadcast whatever message to the public and have them react in a very specific way. That is what marketing does, right? And if you can say certain things are restricted that go against a larger agenda to create more control, and you amplify other things, it's very, very easy to change the entire behavior of an entire nation. You take a look at us, They were telling us to shelter in place. They were telling us self-isolation. They're saying distancing and everything else. And then they show this video of, George Floyd getting killed, right? So we see that. And now all the messaging is about protesting and getting out there. So if they didn't actually amplify that, that wouldn't have been amplified, right? If people are out of work right now, so they can actually take different actions than if there weren't, 30 million unemployed and things like that. So now you're really starting to move people. And so all you need to do, if right now the messaging changed on major social media and they started broadcasting a huge spike in the coronavirus transmission because of this, death rates are up, accurate or inaccurate, they just started putting that, things would change again. So people need to understand that they are just being reactive to these situations and not proactive in creating their reality, right? And so the whole goal in this whole psychological agenda is to create a social elite that can actually continue to move the messaging, right? Continue to move the messaging, and that would move the herd.
Yeah, what I heard throughout this last 3 months with so many red pill type videos was that there was a document that was created 10 years ago from the Rockefeller Foundation called the
Agenda 21?
Was
No.
something about the lockstep plan or program, where they spoke in past tense about this great pandemic that happened, where people needed to wear masks, where there was quarantine, where there was where there was curfew, and then there was pushback from the masses because of massive rates of unemployment and not being able to gather. And then we were able to bring down heavier authoritarian measures of control because of the pushback. So in the Rockefeller document, it was a narrative that was created 10 years ago, kind of like a screenplay that's written, and now the movie's rolling. Mm-hmm. That being said, the pushback was not what was expected from the pandemic alone, from the quarantine, from the lack of employment. So enter this incident that's been hyper magnified, amplified, and like you said, where all the attention on mainstream media is now going. And now the authoritarian control is warranted with curfews, mm-hmm. martial law, rolling out the military.
It's called problem, reaction, solution, right? So you create a problem, you instigate the reaction, and then you sell the solution. Who does this is like As Seen on TV does this great. Are you sick and tired of, things falling out of your cabinet? Oh, this is terrible. Like, oh no, look at this big mess. Now I'm instigating this emotional reaction. Oh, here's the solution. Buy this rack that sits inside your, cupboard, and all of your spices and jars. Really? That's how easy it is, but they sell millions, right? Because that is a problem. It was never really a problem. It was just like, oh yeah, sometimes things fall. Oh, but that's more convenient. So this idea of, I'm going to give up my power so I can feel safe and you know how to manage these things differently. It's much more convenient. And when we're in a space where critical thinking isn't a thing and our sovereignty isn't really valued, then we put our power towards these other people that we really want to have our best interest in mind, even though they have power that's more on their mind. And that's because at our heart, for the majority of people, we're actually good, loving people. So we're not thinking maniacal plans to, take over and do these different horrible things to people so we can get rich. We're not thinking that. The majority of people are not thinking, ooh, you know what? I could go out and loot today and that'll be, just swell. That'll be a great day. I can go, score a laptop or something. The majority of people aren't thinking that. The majority of people are thinking how they can enhance the life of others, how they can take care of their family and their neighbors, how they can have positive, beautiful experiences. So it's even hard for the mind of the general populace to conceive of mass manipulation and doing wrong and creating harm to other people for profit. That it takes a very specific mind, but I'll tell you what, those who can do, and they do it greatly. So the thing is, we have to understand that our mind and where we operate from is very different from those who would cause harm to others for profit. And once we understand that, now we understand that we have to work on changing the hearts and minds of each other more so than just trying to look at these little systematic changes. It's we really have to take the time to do the work.
Yeah, the inner work that you were talking about, the deeper critical thinking and the more what I would call like sitting in the feelings and coming into equanimity instead of reactivity or collapse in our own lives.
Yeah. Well, this is a big time. Like the things are getting shaken up right now. And we do have the ability to create a massive change because so many people are out of work, but at the same time, so many people are having more time on their hands. So communication is still happening. So when we see like, oh, there's something up here, there's bricks here, there's people who are instigating, there's people who want us divided. And when we understand that, we can take a step back and say, you know what? No, we're going to just actually take a moment right now. We're going to take a breath and we're going to say, you know what? How do we want this actually to play out? What is actually the best scenario here? Is it the city on fire and things in ruin? No. Would it be, communicating nonstop about a topic so these structural changes take place to help restructure these communities, to put in, more oversight about places that actually have force, that they can use force? Like, is there more oversight and more responsibility put on them? Can we hold that pressure until those things are in place? Well, once that happens, if you have an independent review panel for police activity and all the police, hell, we will fund them with cameras. Sure, you record every time you're on duty 24/7. If that camera's off, you're getting fined or suspended. Like that is part of your duty, is to, serve and protect. And we do that through observing these different activities. Because when I was in football, our games were filmed, our practices were filmed. We would review everything that we were doing that day, play by play, to see how could we make improvement. If we're not doing that on our policing force that is, guiding the interactions or the livelihoods of people that they're interacting with, when we have far superior technology than 20 years ago or however long it was, why not? Why aren't we reviewing and getting better for the places in power? Like, let's take a look. How did this thing go down? What's wrong with this situation? Day by day. If you think about that, for any police that might have racism in them, they might have, these different things, but they are told techniques, they're taught these different things, and they're worked with systematically. Like, okay, when someone's handcuffed, they're on the ground, you don't need to throw any more punches. You don't need to do any of these things. Like, you don't need to do that. Like, and doing that is excessive, right? And sure, we'll find them and stuff there, but be able to use that as a learning tool, right? And to continually improve. And we're not doing that with the powers that be. These abuses have happened for a long time, and they will continue to happen unless we have a reprogramming system. And that's what we did in football. It was like play by play. Okay, you're supposed to do this. You're supposed to do that. Okay, look at your shoulder position. We would be breaking down everything, so we would be the most efficient in those things. And we just need to look at that excellence in these places of power.
Right. And the police level is even like towards the bottom of that authoritarian regime. Yeah. So all of the levels being held accountable, really like the people standing up for the government being actually more for the people again, constitutional rights, and having a way of monitoring real checks and balances again. I mean, we are so far from this now. It's like the United Corporation of America right now.
Totally is. And the thing is this, though, it is made up of people. Like this whole world, our entire society is made up of people. So it's not that anything in society really has to change except the mentality and our approach. Right. And we just need to step out of dark age thinking and start thinking, hey, if we're unified, let us actually work together on solving these problems. A great project that I love and I follow is called the Venus Project. Mm-hmm. And if you take a look at it, it's a group of scientists, architects, engineers to say, oh, how would a really intelligently designed city work where there's, enough housing and the transportation running? Like that type of thinking is great. And it's coming from a place of not for profit, but for actual civilization. Yeah. Right. So right now, if you take a look at these big authoritarian states, they're not looking at re-architecting society in that manner. that's intelligently designed for the organism of humanity to exist with a quality of life and balance. They're looking at mass surveillance,
Yeah.
a mass, drug induced, it's a combination of like 1984 and it's like 1984, A Brave New World, and Idiocracy all like combined.
Right.
It's a mess. And
Right. It's about suppression and control rather than
yeah,
empowerment and growth and real transformation and
yeah,
health.
and focusing. It's really focusing our attention on how do we want to shift society and where our leaders aren't communicating that, right? Because, and that's where, when you dive into conspiracy, people are like, well, because they don't want that. They're actually feeding on the suffering. It's, Satanists and sadists that are running this thing that actually feed on this negative energy that's here. And that's why you see it in the news and everywhere else. We're not talking about the beautiful things that are happening. It happens very little, or else they'll feed it to it just to take it away. So it creates that bigger up and down and then just constant emotional roller coaster. So
I know
that's
I
our
went
task.
down, I went down the rabbit hole with the black squares and even sent you some of the strange things I found where it goes back to like beyond Egypt, beyond ancient Rome, beyond ancient Egypt, back into Atlantean times and probably predating that into the cult of Saturn. Saturnial like energy is this power and control. It's this kind of like dense frequency feeding off the pain, the suffering, the fear, the loosh. And so my hope, my prayer, my deepest desire is that each one of us who is, feet on the ground, if we're able to be optimally grounded, if we have our basic needs met, that we become so much more willing to feel and to transmute our own dense energy, our own fear, our own rage, our own judgment, our own illusion of separation and hatred and othering, so that we can awaken our hearts. And enough of us in critical mass, there's so many prophecies around the Rainbow Light Warriors awakening at this time. And my sense is that it's beyond the 11th hour, that this is it. This is for those of us who are able to stabilize enough of that frequency, what we would call more Christ consciousness, unconditional love, compassion, embodied wisdom, to really work together to create the bridges in this world and to shift the frequency here.
Definitely. And I mean, this is our time. This is our time to do it. And it's one thing to, for us as light workers and people who are trying to elevate the quotient of light, right? And this is divine light and it's how we radiate. It's not to get caught up, because I've seen some people getting like really bombarded, and some really people who've been on this path for a long time. It is, we have to move into a more elder role, right? You have to look at the suffering and the fighting is coming from our children. All right, these are the children who have not become emotionally grounded. So it's for us to lead them into that space, into the heart. That's what our task with right now is, calming people during these uncertain times, to have them be able to take a breath and look at it and work towards it. It's like intelligent action. Not just action of any type, but intelligent action, knowing where it's coming from and where you're intending it to go. Because if it's not coming from you, chances are someone has programmed those actions to be taken for their profit and benefit. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. And the only way to do that is to have guidance in it. So I'm having conversations with people who are very, left or right on any of these subjects. And like half of the time I see one half attacking the other, and I will try and calm that down and just have still very reasonable conversation and dialogue, because I don't know that person's path, right? So if that person is a racist, it's like, okay, but what helps change that? And it's actually communicating, understanding, okay, why do they think the way that they think? Why are these things the way that they are? And what would possibly change your mind about something? Right? And so when you start looking like, oh, what would possibly change your mind, thinking that all governments and pharmaceutical companies now have your best interest in heart. They really care about you and your well-being, and they want you to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. That's what they ultimately want. really? That was something that was so funny to me, is people all of a sudden was like, oh no, everything that they're telling us is like, I was like, wait a second. It's like the same companies that are getting sued in mass for billions of dollars for the harm that they are causing, we're now throwing all this, like praise and like, oh, they're all for good. And it's like, well, no, there's probably good people in the organization that want to make innovation to create healing. But then there's the people up top that say, okay, what's the most profitable solution here? What is the most profitable solution here? And that's the issue. It really is. We're motivated by things other than love and actually creating our world, right? And the big issue is our division, right? Yeah. We're not near people that we actually affect. If you had to live next to the people who are taking your drugs and it's making them sicker, and you're in that community and that's it, I'm selling all these drugs, but I have to live around all the addicts, you're going to hate where you live. If I'm a drug dealer and I'm selling coke and crack and all types of drugs, but you can only live where you sell. You cannot move out to a nice house in the other area. You have to actually be in what you are creating. It would be very different. It'd be very different. And that's, the way that I look at the world is like, okay, if I'm going to take this action towards my fellow human being, anywhere I am in the world, is this going to be something that's contributive to this person and this community? And is this going to be a situation that I would want to be in? If I'm not adding to that, I don't take that action. I don't take that action.
Thank you for the walk you walk, for your nobility and your heart. And thank you for sharing your voice and getting your work out there. I'm looking forward to reading your book and looking forward to more people knowing about you. And so where would you send people? Is there anything they can find online about your book or anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to follow me, the easiest thing is if you go to MathiasOmotola.com. I just will have a little lead form, just fill that out and I'll keep you informed, because I am just launching. I have been sitting in the background for far too long. Now I'm finally stepping out. It's been a long time. It's been one thing after another in the process of writing it. As I'm sure you know, as you're creating, so many things come up, and a lot of things I had to keep adjusting in the book, because I learned more and more about credit. I learned more and more about, identity theft and all these, situations that a lot of people encounter. So it's been an ongoing thing. So I'm just add me on that. You can find me on Facebook as well, Instagram, Mathias Omotola. You can follow me on that as well. But I'll be building direct communication through that mailing list.
Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today about these really, really meaningful conversations. And I look forward to connecting again.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Always a pleasure. Take care, sister.
Bye, love.
Ciao. You want to talk about that piece?
Yeah, just to clarify, what we're talking about is the difference between being a victim, which is true and real in the world, and running victim mentality when you're not currently in harm's way. And then you had said something about that that's so important.
Yeah, definitely, because there is the victim mentality, which leaves you in a perpetual state of, I can't do anything about this. These things happen to me and there's nothing that I can do. But then there's actual victimization, where you have a perpetrator, someone looking to cause harm or causes harm to someone because they have the power, the authority, or the ability to do it. And it's very different, but those things happen. And when they do happen, that trauma that sits within the victim, and this is something that happens, especially if you take a look for people of color, Blacks, Indigenous people, it's huge, is when you do not acknowledge the injustice or the crime against the person. When you do not say that, hey, this person raped you, molested you, abused you, assaulted you, and that's wrong. When we as society do not go by the victim and say, that is wrong, that was something that was wrong, that was done to you, and we're gonna do what we can so that doesn't happen and help you heal, let us lift up and get stronger together, the victim can then exhale. Okay, it's not just my fault. What were you wearing? Where were you? You shouldn't have been alone with that guy. Like all that stuff, it goes out the window. Like that's, the victim blaming. And like I said, children are victims often. So if you look at it and say, hey, that happened and that was really wrong, allow that system to look at it like, oh, that was wrong. And that was something that was done to you and you were not in a really good position to be able to do anything about that. That understanding, right? If
That
you're
heals.
Black and you have guns pointed at you by the police and they did something to, so you're like, hey, you weren't in a good position, and that was abuse of power. That has nothing to do with you. That's on them, but that happened to you, and we acknowledge that, and we are sorry for that, because we're not trying to create and support an environment like that. We as society want to do something different. And that's the acknowledgement that creates healing. It starts.
Thank you.
Yes, love.
Thank you. So much love to you.
All right, love.
Bye for now.